What's up everybody, welcome to the next chapter of this tutorial where we're gonna go over sculpting the snow in ZBrush. For this chapter I chose to showcase the sculpting of the snow which is closer to the camera, which is the one that received the most amount of details, and I'm gonna skip the other part which is right next to the little house, because it's basically everything you're gonna see here will be exactly the same there, just no more work. So to start things off, I exported the sleigh, or part of the sleigh, the ski part of the sleigh, to be honest, so I can have like a like ridges where the sleigh would go, and then I basically just masked it off and started just doing really basic sculpting to break off the surface, because as I was looking through my reference images I noticed that the more human influence there is in the snow, the more messy it looks. So if you see like a nice mountain or like a hill covered with snow, up close it looks very smooth because of all the particles just being laid out on top of each other. But as soon as like there's people start walking, like animals, like there's like cars and sleigh in our case, it just makes the snow much more lumpy and noisy in that area. So what I basically did is I went in Photoshop and I painted a simple hoof alpha, and I'm using it as alpha with drag dot, just to create some hoof footprints on the snow. For example, like if you have a sleigh, you have deers, and when they walk they leave footprints and stuff like that. So I just wanted to get a little bit of story going on, because the more I developed the image, the more I wanted to introduce little Easter eggs like that, and you will see in the next chapter with the sign. I will do some little writings and stuff like that, just to make it more fun. So I just basically scattered that alpha on the surface, and then just going with the standard brush and just breaking it up, making it a bit more noisy, a bit more irregular, to make it look like there is a lot of footprints, a lot of deers, and not just one. And I'm going a little bit overboard with the roughness and overboard with the roughness and the depth of the detail, because every time you're using subsurface scattering you will lose a lot of the details, and because of Arnold's new shader, the more SSS you introduce, the more you lose your details. So I'm gonna really crank it up and make them look like really deep in ZBrush, because I want them to show on my render. So I'm just trying out different alphas, different brushes, and basically just getting the surface to be lumpy and noisy around these areas as much as possible, because it will make it look really interesting. So at this point I decided, instead of rendering displacement and stuff like that, I'm just gonna decimate the mesh with the preserve UV option ticked, which means that I will still keep my UVs that I have from Maya that I already established, and I will just import the mesh. And as you can see, because in ZBrush I divided the mesh, it shrinked a little bit, but that's no problem for me because it's outside of the camera point of view, and for me that is perfectly fine. As you can see, I did some snow sculpting already on the bridge, and yeah, basically, yeah. And the more I develop the render, the more I realize that some parts need to be more detailed. So I did the very same thing on the surface next to the house as well. So for now, as soon as I started doing the test renders, I realized that there's a snow on the bridge, but the bridge itself, the wood texture was not really conveying that. So all I did is I exported a high resolution subdivided mesh and then a low resolution. And for the low resolution mesh, I went to UV layout, really quickly generated UV. So here is the famous option that I'm talking about in all these chapters, where you make one mesh and then you copy the UVs to the next mesh, and it just, it works beautifully. So even though this mesh was already UV'd in Maya, I decided to just open it again, because it literally takes 10 seconds to do this in UV layout, and then it will just pack everything nicely for me. And yeah, so after this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna export everything to Substance Painter, and I'm gonna start texturing it, because I wanted to add some frosty ice type of effect on top of the wood to make it look a bit more cold, a bit more frozen. So I just packed the UVs as tightly as possible, and in a second we're gonna jump into Substance Painter and have some fun with colors and textures and all that kind of stuff. Once in Painter, first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna import that high resolution mesh from Maya, because I didn't do any sculpting, on the bridge wood. I'm just gonna utilize Maya's smooth mesh smooth mesh node to generate the normal map for Painter that is going to be used for driving a lot of my procedural texturing methods. So here we are wrapping up the UVs in UV layout and jumping to Substance Painter. So first things first, generating the textures. Everything I do, I generate 4K, and then I can go lower or higher. It depends on the production needs or the render needs. So almost done baking the textures, and I'm gonna first try to see what kind of shaders come with Painter itself, but I didn't really like any of the wood shaders, so I just basically went to my wood library, created a fill layer, and then imported a wood texture that I'm going to use as a base for the bridge. And then to make it a bit older, I'm gonna create a new fill layer, and I'm gonna take a bit more rough, a bit more desaturated texture that I'm going to use to just break things up a little bit, and blend between these two. And then the third texture is just for color variation breakup. The more layers you add, the better things will going to look like. So yeah, pretty much I'm just literally dragging, dropping procedural nodes, and just tweaking the parameters to reveal in places where I want them to be, because this was going to be very old weathered wood. I intentionally created this to be a very splotchy and very dirty looking, because it's going to sell it that much better. So on top of that, I created the snow shader, and I'm just experimenting with a bit of variation just to make it look frosty. But then I didn't really get the type of snow procedurally that I wanted, So instead I used the particle brush with the black, created a black mask, and then used a particle brush to generate all these cool crystal-like effects. And then I'm gonna create a paint on top of this, and I'm gonna pretty much go and erase a lot of this because I just wanted to I want to have it in certain areas, and at this point it was a bit too much. But instead of controlling it with the particle brush, it was much simpler for me to just add a paint node and just go in and delete everywhere you don't want snow to occur, or frost I should say. And then to emphasize some of the edges and break up the surface a little bit, I went in the crevices and on edges, and I was trying to think where ice and frost will collect, and basically just went and painted in by hand. And a lot of people rely on the procedural methods of texturing in Painter, which is brilliant, and it speeds up a lot of stuff. But don't forget that Painter is still a painting application. That's why it's called Painter. So you can still do hand painted work to emphasize your procedural work. So don't be afraid to stray away from the procedurality of things, and do some hand painting workflow. As a texture artist, that's still your job to do that kind of stuff, because if you were using something like Mari, everything that we did in Painter by now would have been hand painted. So in a lot of productions, they do not use, like in Brownback, for example, right now at this point in time, we do not use Painter yet. So it's still very valuable to know how to achieve this stuff by hand. So after that being done, I'm just exporting the TIFF as a format of choice, and then literally just creating a Arnold material and then dragging and dropping the textures from your folder into the Hypershade, and just connecting them into Arnold shader. Don't forget, when you're using normal maps and roughness maps, basically anything that connects alpha instead of color needs to be set. The input of the texture needs to be switched to raw. So here I forgot that I UV'd the bridge separately, so I just imported the UV'd mesh and just reassigned the shader, and everything works perfectly. And the stuff that I painted works in collaboration with the snow that I sculpted on top of the bridge, and it gives a really nice feel. So that would be it for this chapter. We're getting really close to being done. The next few chapters would be tweaking the signs, and then we're gonna wrap it up with some final words. Thank you for following and sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.